Welcome back. Now, the unemployment rate is said to have decreased to 34.5% in the first quarter of 2022. This means around 7.9 million people are officially unemployed in our country. The quarterly labour force survey for 2022 has also found that the jobless rate is at 45.5%. For more on this, political analyst Jamie Mighty joins us now to discuss this more. Thank you very much, Jamie, for your time here on all angles. I mean, no reason to celebrate, right? Decrease, the word decrease doesn't really mean...
Yeah, I think it's a very slight decrease, and most of the structural issues that continue to plague South Africa remain. And if specifically when you look at the jobless rate, which is at 45.5, that's particularly high. And having 12.4 unemployed people is quite significant, because it means that the welfare burden of the state is quite high. But even when you dig deeper into the employment data, the employment side, what you'll find is that our manufacturing is still relatively low as an employer. And in addition, that a lot of people are working within the skills level 1 and 2 ILO classifications. Just to explain to the viewer, the International Labour Organization classifies jobs based on the skill level it takes to get in. So, for example, skill level 2 is if you have a grade 10 qualification in terms of education, grade 10 knowledge base rather, or grade 9 if you will. And we have a lot of workers in the level 2 and level 1 in the employment data. And what this reflects is that we have people who are still very much at risk of poverty, at risk of low quality of life, even though technically they're employed. And then when you look at the youth unemployment, which is particularly and stubbornly high, and then you look at the youth who are not in employment, education and training, that number is also high. And what this indicates is that you've got a very fragile generation which is not getting further education and training, which is actually not currently employed and actually facing prospects where the technology that is coming in is going to make it very difficult for them to find the old jobs that people will be able to access at skill level 1 and 2. This is because even when you go to a McDonald's or a KFC, you can see the automation is beginning to come in to a variety of jobs, and this is actually making those particular jobs less available. So when you track this information with the education data, where you're seeing that there's still a very, very low skills base in South Africa, where organizations such as the World Economic Forum and their Global Competitiveness Index have indicated that South Africa is doing very low at skills and also digital skills, that shows you that there's still a very vulnerable generation here, and that this data here is not necessarily something that we ought to take as the storm is over, so to speak.
And I mean, Jamie, for technology to work, for the fourth industrial revolution to work, you need power, you need electricity.
Yes, that's true. And, those perennial problems of ESCOM are not necessarily going to be able to attract not even just the high-tech 4IR jobs, even the manufacturing capacity. Because if manufacturers want to come into a country, the one thing that they want to know is, number one, that the lights will be on. They'll be able to go to the factory and make things, because you can't lose production days. That adds to your costs. And in addition, they want to make sure that they have a high-skilled workforce that can actually deliver on the job that is being required. So in this particular instance, if you think about what's going on, you'll see that not only do we have this youth unemployment being very high and this jobless rate being very high, which I think is more reflective, because the official unemployment doesn't look at people who've stopped looking for work. So I think the jobless rate is actually a very good indicator to keep an eye on. So when you look at that, then you think that, will this make manufacturers come into the country? It won't. And that's where we have a critical problem, because we're not boosting internal manufacturing and we're not making it attractive for outside investors.
And of course, our political outlook as well also adds to it. I mean, things look worse in terms of what ESCOM used to be at least a year or two ago. And it just seems to those investors who would have loved to come to this country, it looks like there's no accountability, even with the State Capture Commission having, happened.
Yeah, that's true. And these macro factors are quite important because this year in particular, I think the global community is watching what happens with the ANC quite closely to see whether there's going to be a stable leadership in the next 5 years. Because obviously, if Cyril Ramaphosa prevails at the conference, at least they can be assured that there's going to be some stability and some certainty in terms of the appetite that government has, in terms of the approach that they have to business. But the internal factional fighting of the ANC in and of itself poses a risk to stability. It poses a risk to the ease of doing business, because if, for instance, we have another situation like July last year, that could cost a business billions. So the international markets are definitely looking quite cautiously. But I think even internal investors, companies that were considering expansion, companies that were considering new projects, those companies are also going to be sitting on the fence this year to try to see whether or not there will be a change in direction. But I think critically, when we are speaking about where will the jobs come from in future, they will come if we improve our education, if we fix ESCOM. But another place that we can look is the support of small businesses. Companies such as Google, Tesla, Facebook, Twitter are employing over 300,000 people in total. And these are new companies which came in the last 30 years. So the question then becomes, how is South Africa supporting small businesses? How is it supporting startups? How is it supporting creative and disruptive entrepreneurs? And what you'll find oftentimes is that people say that they're not receiving the right level of support from the state, and they're not receiving access to funding, seed funding, venture capital funding, because a lot of times they are coming with brilliant ideas, but coming from backgrounds where they don't have the kind of garage funding that other people would have. Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak started Apple in a garage with their mom's support, etc., etc. But in the townships, you're not going to get a mother who has $100,000 to give you. So that's where we need to close the gap, so that we can have, the interesting companies like Drip and Bat, which are employing people, but we're not seeing a lot of high-tech startups coming out of South Africa. And that's partly because you have brilliant young people who don't have access to funding and a runway where they can create what they are envisioning.
All right. Thank you very much, Jamie Mighty, for your time here on All Angles. He is a political analyst.